My name is Ava Morgan. I'm 29, the youngest daughter of the Morgans of Charlottesville, Virginia. The kind of family where image was everything, and you only mattered if you wore it like a badge. If you looked at our family photos, you'd see three picture-perfect siblings. My older brother Eli, the golden boy with a jawline from a toothpaste commercial and a mortgage on a vineyard estate. Rachel, the middle child, the PR queen, flawless hair, $3,000 handbags, charity brunches in Napa. Then there was me, the one in the corner, the one they cropped out for Instagram, the one who chose the hard way. They all became exactly what our parents expected. I didn't. I dropped out of college, chased a startup dream nobody believed in, and disappeared from family radar long enough that people in town assumed I'd moved to another country, or failed, quietly. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Until last week. The call came on a Tuesday night. My phone lit up while I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of my one-bedroom loft in East Austin, half-eaten veggie curry on my lap, a spreadsheet open on my laptop screen tracking Q3 sustainability data for small-scale housing developments across the Midwest. Rachel Morgan. I stared at the name for a long second, like it might vanish if I blinked. I hadn't heard her voice in almost 5 years, not since the night she cornered me at Thanksgiving and said, with a smile that cut like glass, "It must be hard living paycheck to paycheck. I'd die without my blowouts." I should have ignored the call, but something in me needed to hear what she sounded like, to know if anything, if she, had changed. I picked up. "Hey," she said. Same voice, same icy control. "We're having a family meeting. It's about Mom and Dad. Their health's getting worse. Can you make it?" That was it. Not a "how are you?" Not a "where have you been?" Just the command, wrapped in soft suggestion: show up or stay irrelevant. I answered quietly, "I'll be there." Then she hung up. I didn't move for a full minute. Jasper, my dog, crawled into my lap, sensing something in the air. Maybe he could feel the knot twisting behind my ribs. Maybe he remembered the last time I'd packed a bag for Charlottesville and came home in tears. The memories weren't hard to find. My last visit ended in silence, slammed doors, and a family dinner where Rachel accidentally spilled wine on my thrift store dress, and Eli announced a promotion based on a concept that sounded suspiciously like the one I had shared with him months earlier, in confidence. They toasted him with vintage Merlot. I left before dessert. It's strange. When you vanish long enough, people build their own story about where you've been. They fill in the blanks with pity, or worse, superiority. In their version of my life, I was struggling, renting someone's attic, taking on scraps of design work, probably dating artists and living off boxed wine and takeout noodles. They had no idea I'd been quietly building something. No idea that I'd spent 3 years developing a proprietary platform for carbon-efficient home design. A platform that was recently acquired for $35 million by a major green tech firm in San Francisco. No idea that I now owned 28% equity in a firm expanding across 5 states. No idea that I had an assistant, a legal team, and a private pilot named Reed on retainer. Because I'd told no one. I didn't need applause. I needed peace. But peace has a funny way of being interrupted the moment you think you're safe. That call cracked something open. Not because I missed them, but because I was tired of hiding, of letting them define me through silence. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition, not applause, but eye contact, not guilt. But the truth. They called this meeting because Mom had broken her hip. Dad's memory was getting worse. They needed to make decisions, split costs, assign roles, and in their minds, I was still the one who couldn't afford groceries. I was still the one they pitied. And that was what made me book the flight. I didn't fly private. I booked the cheapest economy seat on the earliest Southwest flight back to Virginia. Leo, my assistant, was confused. "You want me to prep the jet?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want them to see what they expect to see." "The backpack, too?" I smiled. Definitely the backpack. That night, I packed the bag I used in college, the one with the frayed strap and the stain from the time I spilled oat milk on my laptop. I packed one hoodie, 2 pairs of jeans, and a pair of sneakers with worn soles. I looked in the mirror before bed and stared at the version of me they thought they knew. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. Because when I landed in Charlottesville, I wasn't just bringing baggage, I was bringing a truth they couldn't laugh away. If you've ever been the underdog in your own family, if you've been underestimated, overlooked, and quietly building your future while everyone else writes you off, then this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel. We make videos like this to tell the stories that never get told, the stories that hit close to home, because they are home, and your support helps us keep going. Now I have a question for you. If your family assumed you failed, but you actually built a fortune in secret, would you tell them everything or stay silent and let them keep talking? Comment A if you'd reveal it all. Comment B if you'd play along and surprise them when the time is right. Drop your answer in the comments. And don't go anywhere, because what happens at that family meeting, you won't believe how far it goes. I've always believed families write silent scripts for their children. Some get cast as the star, others as the steady hand, and some, like me, get written as the background character who fills the space but never takes the spotlight. In the Morgan family script, Eli was the hero, Rachel was the shining co-star, and I was the cautionary tale. Even back in high school, the roles were clear. Eli, the oldest, was the golden boy, captain of the baseball team, top of his class, the one teachers praised and neighbors admired. Our parents framed his newspaper clippings, displayed his trophies, and never missed a chance to remind the rest of us that Eli was going places. Rachel, the middle child, wore charisma like perfume. She ran student council, organized charity events, and spoke with the kind of confidence that drew crowds. By the time she graduated, she already had an internship lined up at a marketing firm in D.C. My parents told anyone who would listen, Rachel's going to conquer the world. And then there was me, Ava, the odd one out. I wasn't failing. I wasn't even struggling, but I didn't fit their mold. While Eli hit home runs and Rachel practiced speeches, I spent hours sketching blueprints for solar-powered houses or tinkering with old computers I picked up at yard sales. My notebooks weren't filled with prom plans or sorority applications. They were filled with algorithms, diagrams, and questions I was desperate to answer. But to my family, none of that mattered. My father once looked at a prototype I'd made for a low-cost, energy-efficient water filter and said, "Cute hobby, Ava, but when are you going to focus on something practical?" Practical, in his world, meant degrees, mortgages, and golf memberships. Rachel laughed at my projects, saying, "You can't build a life on doodles and experiments." And Eli was more subtle. He smiled, nodded, even asked questions. Once, I thought maybe he actually saw me. But months later, when I overheard him at a barbecue describing his latest idea for sustainable housing tech, nearly identical to mine, I realized what he'd done. He stole it. He took my work, dressed it up in his polished tone, and used it to secure a promotion at his firm. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, replaying his words in my head. It felt like betrayal disguised as sibling pride. And the worst part? My parents beamed at him as though he had invented fire. When I tried to speak up, Rachel shut me down with a laugh. "Don't make this about you, Ava. You sound jealous." Jealous. That word stung more than the theft itself. From then on, I stopped sharing. College was supposed to be my chance to rewrite the script, but even there, the shadow followed. I started at the University of Virginia, majoring in environmental design. The first semester, I thrived. But when I told my family I wanted to drop out and pursue a startup idea, dinner went silent. Dad set down his fork. "You're throwing your life away. You'll regret this, Ava." Mom's eyes brimmed with worry. "Why can't you be more like Rachel? She's building stability." And Eli smirked, leaning back in his chair. Startups are for Silicon Valley kids with trust funds. Get real, Ava. Nobody takes people like you seriously. I remember swallowing the lump in my throat, forcing a smile and saying nothing. But inside, something shifted. Their doubt didn't break me. It hardened me. I still remember the summer after graduation. The Charlottesville Wine Festival was in full swing, tents lined with local vendors, jazz music floating through the air. I set up a tiny booth on the far end, trying to show off an early version of my carbon tracking app. I thought maybe this time they'd see me differently. Eli, wandered by, glass of Cabernet in hand, and listened with interest. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he believed in me. Maybe he was proud. But weeks later, a friend in the local tech circle pulled me aside. Hey, congrats! Eli's firm just pitched that carbon app idea. Everyone's talking about it. My stomach dropped. It wasn't congratulations. It was confirmation. My brother had taken my idea. Again. And this time, he profited from it. I confronted him once, quietly, outside Mom's house. You stole from me. He just shrugged. Ideas are free, Ava. Execution is what matters. And you wouldn't have pulled it off anyway. The arrogance, the dismissal, it burned into my memory like a scar. Rachel wasn't much better. If Eli stole in silence, she sabotaged in whispers. When I skipped college to launch my first startup, she told relatives at Thanksgiving that I was unstable. When I missed a wedding to work a night shift, she told family friends I was too irresponsible to hold a job. She poisoned the air with little digs that, over time, turned people against me. Soon, invitations stopped coming. Investors I had lined up suddenly ghosted me. Even old family friends in Charlottesville avoided me at social gatherings. Rachel once leaned over during a wine tasting event, her voice honeyed but sharp, and said, "You make us look bad, Ava. Why can't you just settle down and follow the script?" That was the night I realized something. I didn't just burn the script, I left the stage entirely. So when Rachel called me last week, asking me to return home for a family meeting, the irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they wrote me out of the story. They erased me, mocked me, and turned me into a cautionary tale. Now suddenly, I was being summoned back, not as the failure they thought I was, but as something else, and they had no idea. That phone call didn't just bring me back to Charlottesville. It brought me back to every scar, every betrayal, every whispered rumor that painted me as less. But here's the thing about scripts. You can only play the part for so long before you decide to rip the pages apart and write your own. That's what I did. And if they thought they knew how this story would end, well, they hadn't seen the next chapter. Not yet. When I left Charlottesville with nothing but a frayed backpack, $300, and a heart full of quiet rage, I didn't know where I was going. I only knew where I couldn't stay. Austin wasn't part of a plan. It was the place I landed when a rideshare driver on my way to Dallas convinced me the city was alive with startups and music and possibility. I rented a corner of a stranger's apartment, slept on a mattress pushed against a window that leaked when it rained, and told myself I'd only be there for a few months. Those months stretched into years. At first, survival was the only thing on my mind. I picked up shifts at a cafe near 6th Street, brewing lattes in the mornings and wiping down sticky counters at night. I freelanced when I could, design mock-ups, small coding gigs, sometimes babysitting jobs when the bills piled too high. I lived on lentils, dollar noodles, and the stubborn belief that if I just kept going, something would click. People think hitting rock bottom is one catastrophic fall, a single night when everything collapses. It's not. It's a series of small humiliations. The time I couldn't cover my rent and slept 3 nights on a friend's futon, pretending I was just visiting. The night I watered down a jar of peanut butter to stretch it into soup. The time I got dressed up for a pitch meeting only to find out the investor had canceled hours before and I had spent my last bus fare getting there. Every failure echoed my family's voices. Dad saying, "You're throwing your life away." Rachel whispering, "Don't embarrass us." Eli smirking, "Nobody takes people like you seriously." And yet, every time I fell, I learned something. The first startup I launched, a community barter app, failed within months. I trusted the wrong partner, who drained our small seed fund and vanished, leaving me with $10,000 in debt and a landlord threatening eviction. The second, an online platform for small artisan shops, folded when our only investor pulled out during a tech downturn. I spent weeks couch surfing, carrying my backpack like a turtle shell, code stored on thumb drives I was terrified of losing. But failure, I discovered, is the harshest teacher and the most loyal one. Each collapse carved me sharper. Each betrayal trained me to ask harder questions, to build tighter systems, to stop looking for validation and start demanding results. The turning point came at an eco summit hosted at a community college in Austin. I almost didn't go. I couldn't afford the ticket, but a friend slipped me a volunteer badge. My job was to pass out water bottles and stack chairs. But in between sessions, I started talking to anyone who would listen. I spoke about the idea that had been gnawing at me since Charlottesville, the dream of building a platform that could help ordinary homeowners measure and reduce their carbon footprint, not just for corporations with big budgets, but for families like mine. Families who thought sustainability meant buying organic wine, not realizing that real change started in the wiring of their homes, the appliances they used, the energy they wasted without knowing. Some people nodded politely and walked away. But one man, a professor from UT Austin, stopped me mid-sentence. "You're onto something," he said. "Do you have a prototype?" I laughed. "Not yet." "Well," he said, handing me his card, "you should." That night, I sat in a diner until dawn, sketching the first wireframes of what would become Verdant, a sustainable living app that tracked home energy use, gave practical recommendations, and connected homeowners with local green contractors. The next 2 years nearly broke me. I worked 18-hour days, coding in coffee shops until my eyes burned. I applied for grants, entered competitions, got rejected more times than I could count. I lived out of that same duffel bag through 2 moves, carrying my dream like contraband. There were nights I thought about quitting, nights when the weight of debt pressed so hard on my chest I could barely breathe. Nights when I stared at the ceiling and heard Rachel's laughter. "You can't build a life on doodles and experiments." But then there were moments that kept me alive. The first time Verdant successfully tracked energy usage in a test household. The email from a local nonprofit asking if they could pilot the app with their low-income housing units. The look on a single mom's face when she told me her monthly electric bill dropped by $40 because of my tool. Those moments stitched me back together. 3 years after that summit, I walked into a boardroom in San Francisco with nothing but a laptop and my voice. The walls were lined with executives from a major green tech firm. I wore thrift store jeans and a blazer 2 sizes too big. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they could hear it. But when I finished my presentation, the room was silent. Not with dismissal, with attention. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers. Verdant was acquired for $35 million. I kept equity. I kept my role as Chief Vision Officer. And for the first time in my life, I felt what power tasted like. Not the kind that comes from a family name or a bank account inherited, but the kind that comes from clawing your way out of the mud with your bare hands and refusing to let go of your vision. I didn't tell my family. When my parents called, I let them believe I was scraping by. When Eli offered me a starter position at his firm, I thanked him politely and said I was busy freelancing. When Rachel mailed me a gift card to a discount clothing store for job interviews, I sent back a handwritten thank you note. Because hiding wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. The less they knew, the freer I was. But when Rachel's call came last week, summoning me back for that family meeting, I felt the old script pressing in around me, the role of the broke little sister, the family screw-up, the background character. Only this time, I wasn't carrying a frayed backpack full of sketches. I was carrying a company, a fortune, and a truth they weren't ready for. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to show them. The morning of the flight, I stood in front of my closet, staring at 2 different versions of myself. On one side, the tailored suits I'd bought for investor meetings in San Francisco, silk blouses gifted by designers I'd collaborated with, watches that cost more than my first year of rent combined. On the other, the pile of clothes I'd carried since my cafe shifts in Austin. A hoodie with a hole in the sleeve, a pair of thrifted jeans, faded and frayed at the knees, and the sneakers I'd worn to my first pitch, the soles worn thin, the laces gray. I chose the sneakers. Not because I didn't have better, but because those shoes carried a story my family refused to hear. They were the symbol of everything I'd clawed through, the quiet resilience that built Verdant out of ashes. And when I walked into that family meeting, I wanted them to look me in the eye and still see what they thought was failure, because the truth was going to taste that much sweeter when it landed. Leo drove me to the airport. He watched as I slung my old duffel bag into the trunk of his car, frowning like he wanted to argue. "You're really going to show up like that?" he asked. "Like what?" I said, climbing in beside him. "Like you just got evicted." I laughed. "That's exactly the point." He shook his head, but there was a smile tugging at his lips. "You know, most people in your position would arrive in a black SUV, wearing sunglasses, making an entrance." I glanced out the window at the morning traffic. "I don't want an entrance. Not yet. I want to see them in their natural habitat, before I change the air in the room." He was quiet for a moment. "And if they push you too far?" I didn't answer right away, because that was the part I hadn't decided. On the plane, wedged between a snoring businessman and a teenager blasting music through cheap headphones, I had more time than I wanted to think. I stared out the window as the Texas horizon fell away and Virginia drew closer with every mile. For years, I'd avoided this flight. I'd stayed away from home not because I couldn't afford to return, but because I couldn't stomach what returning meant. It meant stepping back into the role they'd written for me. The broke sister, the disappointment, the outsider who didn't measure up. But now, things had shifted. I wasn't flying home to prove myself. I was flying home to choose, to decide if there was anything left worth salvaging, or if this meeting would be the moment I severed ties completely. The old Ava would have begged for their approval. This Ava was walking in with options. The cab ride from the airport into Charlottesville was like driving through a time capsule. Rolling vineyards stretched out on either side of the road, golden in the late afternoon sun. I passed familiar landmarks, the ice cream shop where Eli once held his birthday parties, the church where Rachel had paraded her flawless confirmations, the brick library where I'd hidden in the back corner, sketching ideas nobody cared about. The closer we got to the Morgan estate, the tighter the knot in my stomach pulled. I remembered the last time I'd pulled into that driveway. Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. Rachel's fiancé at the time had smirked at my thrift store dress, and Eli had announced his promotion, my idea dressed up as his own. My mother had fussed over Rachel's hair and Eli's tie, then turned to me with a sigh. "Ava, you look tired." That night, I'd left before pie was served, and I never went back. Until now. The cab slowed as we turned down the familiar gravel road. The house came into view, a sprawling, colonial-style estate, white columns, a wraparound porch, a small vineyard stretching out back. To outsiders, it looked like the picture of Southern charm. To me, it looked like a stage set, one I'd been cast out of long ago. Eli was on the porch, wearing khakis and a polo, glancing at his watch like he was timing my arrival. Rachel's sleek black SUV was already parked out front. I stepped out of the cab, slinging my backpack over my shoulder. Eli gave me a once-over, his smirk sharp enough to slice. "Flight delayed, or did you hitchhike?" I smiled tightly. "Good to see you too, Eli." His eyes flicked down to my sneakers, lingering on the scuffed toes, the frayed laces. He didn't hide the laugh that bubbled up. "Still dressing like a college dropout, huh?" I didn't answer. I just followed him inside, where Rachel was waiting in the foyer, her hair perfect, her perfume expensive enough to announce her presence before she spoke. Ava, she said, smiling like she was greeting a guest she didn't quite want. Glad you made it. That must have been a stretch. She looked pointedly at my duffel bag, then at my hoodie. Her meaning was clear. I forced a calm tone. I'm here. Isn't that what matters? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course. That night, as I unpacked in my childhood bedroom, still painted the pale yellow my mother had chosen when I was 12, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the worn posters on the walls. Band logos, sketches I'd taped up years ago, a bulletin board filled with outdated reminders. It was like walking into a time machine, except the girl who had once lived here didn't exist anymore. I ran my hand over the comforter, frayed from years of wash cycles, and thought about the decision I'd made that morning. The sneakers, the duffel, the hoodie. I could have shown up in diamonds. I could have walked in with the weight of millions in my stride. But I wanted them to underestimate me, because underestimation is power. It gives you the element of surprise, the luxury of choice, the freedom to reveal only when the timing is perfect. And something in my gut told me that timing was coming. Soon. The next morning, we would gather in the living room for the meeting. Eli would have his laptop open, slides prepared. Rachel would have her notebook ready, her voice dripping with condescension. And I, still in my old sneakers, would take my place in the corner, the youngest Morgan, the one they thought was poor. But they had no idea what was about to land in their world. The Morgan living room hadn't changed in 20 years. The same pale blue curtains framing the wide windows. The same grandfather clock ticking relentlessly in the corner. The same stiff couches Mom had picked out when I was still in middle school, already worn on the arms but stubbornly polished for guests. That morning, the family meeting started sharp at 9 o'clock, as if Eli had scheduled it like one of his real estate presentations. He stood at the front of the room in a pressed polo and slacks, laptop balanced on the coffee table, a projector humming softly against the cream-colored wall. The screen read, Parental Care Options Costs. I sank into the low stool tucked in the corner, the same seat I'd always been given as a child. No matter how old I got, no matter how far I traveled, here in this room, I was still the youngest, the one without a real seat at the table. Mom sat carefully in her recliner, wincing with every shift of her hip. Dad was beside her, his gaze foggy, as though he was half present, drifting in and out of the conversation before it even began. Rachel perched elegantly on the couch, her notebook open, pen poised, as if she were taking notes at a board meeting for her firm in D.C. Eli cleared his throat, clicking to the first slide. These are the top facilities we've researched, he said, his tone polished, practiced. Photos of manicured lawns, modern medical wings, and luxury dining halls flickered across the wall. They all offer memory care programs, hip rehabilitation, premium private suites. Some even host wine socials and vineyard tours. Mom's eyes widened. That sounds expensive. Eli nodded gravely. Of course. Premium care isn't cheap, but they deserve the best, and this is the reality we're facing. He clicked again, revealing columns of numbers. Their insurance and savings cover a portion, but not enough. That leaves a gap. We'll need to divide the costs as a family. Rachel leaned forward, her pen tapping lightly against her notebook. We've thought about the fairest way to split it. Her eyes flicked briefly toward me, sharp, assessing, then dismissive. Eli and I can handle 60% each, covering the majority, she said smoothly. That leaves 10%, about $800 a month, for you, Ava. The words landed like a slap. $800. They assumed, without question, that I couldn't contribute more, that I couldn't possibly have the means to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. Before I could respond, Rachel added, her voice syrupy sweet. Of course, we know things are tight for you, so if 800 is too much, maybe you could just pitch in with visits. Emotional support, you know. Nobody expects you to match us. The pity in her tone was worse than the dismissal. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my face carefully neutral. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to reveal everything in one thunderous confession. But instead, I let the silence stretch, watching them write the story without asking me a single question. Mom shifted in her seat, glancing at me with concern. "Honey, you look tired. Are you eating enough? If groceries are ever tight, just call. We'll make sure you're okay." Her words twisted like a knife. They had no idea I'd been covering part of their medical bills in secret for nearly 2 years, transferring funds through anonymous accounts, letting them believe it was insurance refunds. They had no idea I could pay every one of those luxury facilities in full, upfront, and not even blink. Dad looked at me, his eyes briefly clear. "Still in that little apartment with the loud neighbors?" he asked, his voice soft. I swallowed. "It's comfortable, Dad." Rachel chuckled lightly, scribbling something in her notebook. "Comfort's relative. Remember when Ava thought success was affording brand name wine instead of boxed?" The room erupted with laughter. Eli's deep chuckle, Rachel's high-pitched giggle, even Dad's confused smile joining in. I smiled faintly, though inside, something snapped. Eli clicked through more slides, his voice steady, his eyes occasionally darting toward me. "We're talking about thousands a month," he emphasized. "This is serious business. Rachel and I are prepared to shoulder the weight. Ava, if you can manage your portion, great. If not, we'll work around it." Rachel nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're just being practical. We can't all measure success the same way, and some of us have to be realistic." I leaned back slightly, keeping my breathing calm, though my fists were clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. They weren't just making plans. They were cementing a narrative. Eli, the responsible son. Rachel, the selfless daughter. Ava, the struggling sister who could chip in crumbs but never sit at the grown-up table. And they were doing it right in front of me as though I wasn't even there. At one point, I excused myself to get water. I slipped into the hallway, away from their eyes, and that's when I heard it. Eli's voice, low, but not low enough. "She'll have to pay whatever we say," he muttered to Rachel. "Where else can she go? She's got no real job, no options." Rachel giggled. "Exactly. Let's set her share low so she feels useful, but we control the rest." My blood ran cold. They weren't just underestimating me, they were exploiting me. Years of betrayal, Eli stealing my ideas, Rachel spreading rumors, it all came rushing back, pressing hot against my ribs. And now this calculated plan to box me into the role of the family charity case. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes closed, fists trembling. When I walked back into the living room, my face was calm, my posture steady. Eli clicked to another slide. Rachel smiled like she'd already won. And I sat back down on that stool, letting them think the game was theirs, because they had no idea what was coming next. The laughter in the living room hadn't even faded when Rachel turned her gaze on me again. She tilted her head, smiling with all the sweetness of poisoned honey. "You know, Ava," she said, her eyes darting to my sneakers, "I keep wondering how you even got here. That taxi that dropped you off looked like it had 3 different paint jobs. You really should think about buying a car. A real one, not whatever clunker you keep patching together." Eli chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "She probably can't afford one. Still walking around in those same shoes from college." He smirked. "Classic Ava." Their laughter filled the room, echoing off the walls, sharper than any knife. Even Mom let out a weak chuckle, though she quickly covered it with a cough, as if embarrassed. Dad looked confused, shifting in his recliner, half smiling without knowing why. I stared down at my sneakers, the scuffed toes, the frayed laces, the faded fabric. And for a moment, I let myself feel it. The humiliation, the years of being the punchline, the years of silence. Then, slowly, I smiled, because the timing was perfect. I pulled out my phone, scrolling until I found the name I needed. I pressed call and held the phone to my ear. "Hey," I said, my voice calm, almost casual. It's me. You close? On the other end, Reed, my pilot, answered. 5 minutes out. Perfect, I said. Front yard's clear. I hung up, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Eli frowned. Seriously, Ava, we're in the middle of an important discussion. You can't just take personal calls right now. Rachel rolled her eyes. What, did your Uber cancel? I didn't respond. I just leaned back on the stool, crossing my legs, letting the silence do the work. At first, the sound was faint. A low thrum, distant, barely noticeable over the hum of Eli's projector. He clicked through another slide, talking about cost analysis and monthly breakdowns, his voice full of importance. But then the sound grew louder, deeper, a heavy chopping that rattled the windows. Mom frowned, glancing toward the curtains. What on earth is that noise? Dad leaned forward, squinting. Sounds like a helicopter? Rachel laughed nervously. Don't be ridiculous. Who would? The roar cut her off. Glasses on the coffee table trembled. The grandfather clock shook against the wall. A vase toppled over, clattering to the floor. And then, unmistakably, the blades swept over the front lawn, rattling the china cabinet until porcelain clinked like teeth. Eli jumped to his feet, storming toward the window. What the hell? He froze. Rachel scrambled up beside him, her face draining of color as she caught sight of the sleek black helicopter lowering onto the perfectly manicured grass. The downwash bent the vines of the family vineyard, whipping leaves into the air. Mom gasped, clutching the arms of her chair. Is that? Rachel's voice cracked. Is that for us? I stood slowly, slipping my backpack over my shoulder. No, I said calmly. It's for me. The rotor wash grew deafening as the helicopter settled. Reed, in his crisp uniform, raised a hand in a quick, professional wave from the cockpit. For a moment, nobody in the room spoke. Eli's jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Rachel stumbled back, her hand pressed against her chest. Mom's eyes were wide, shining with confusion and awe. Dad muttered something, my name, I think, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I turned toward them, my voice steady. You'll want to grab your coats. We're not finished here, but this conversation isn't happening in this house anymore. Rachel's knees buckled, and she dropped back onto the couch, pale as linen. This isn't real. Eli shook his head, his voice rising. What kind of game are you playing, Ava? No game, I said. Just a change of venue. I walked to the front door, pulling it open as the wind from the blades blasted through, scattering papers from Eli's carefully prepared binder across the floor. He scrambled to pick them up, his polished composure cracking with every second. Rachel clutched her notebook to her chest, frozen. Mom pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, whispering prayers. Dad leaned forward in his chair, his eyes sharper now, locked on me with a mixture of pride and disbelief. I turned back once, meeting their eyes. My ride's here. And then I stepped outside. The noise outside was deafening. Grass flattened under the force of the blades. Dust and leaves swirled around me as I walked toward the chopper, my backpack slung casually over one shoulder. Reed stepped out, ducking low, opening the passenger door. Behind me, I heard footsteps, hesitant at first, then quicker. Eli's voice shouted over the roar. Ava, what is this? What are you doing? I didn't turn around. Rachel's voice was shrill, almost panicked. You can't just fly off in the middle of this. We're making decisions. You can't run away again. I paused at the door of the helicopter, then finally looked back. Who said I was running away? I called, my voice carrying over the roar. Come on, we've got more to discuss. But if you want answers, if you really want the truth, you'll have to follow me. For a long moment, they just stood there. Eli, fists clenched, his perfect polo no match for the chaos swirling around him. Rachel, clutching her designer bag like it was the only solid thing left. Mom and Dad on the porch, caught between fear and wonder. Then, slowly, Eli stepped forward. Rachel followed, her face pale, her steps unsteady. Mom leaned on Dad's arm as he shuffled forward, his eyes locked on the machine as if it were some mythical beast. One by one, they climbed in. The door shut. Reed gave me a nod. And as the helicopter lifted off the lawn, shaking the Morgan estate down to its bones, I felt it, the shift. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet, underestimated sister sitting on the stool in the corner. I was the one holding the controls, even if I wasn't flying the chopper. And my family? They were just passengers now, carried into a world they never believed I belonged to. The flight from the Morgan estate to my property outside Austin only lasted 25 minutes, but to my family, it must have felt like an eternity. Rachel sat stiffly in her seat, one manicured hand clutching her bag, the other gripping the harness strap as if it could save her from falling. Eli's knuckles were white against the armrest, his jaw locked tight, eyes darting from the horizon to me, back and forth like he was trying to solve a riddle he couldn't crack. Mom was silent, her lips moving as if in prayer. Dad stared out the window, blinking rapidly, murmuring, "Ava, my Ava," every so often, as though trying to anchor himself to reality. Me? I leaned back against the seat, calm as ever, my old sneakers resting firmly on the floor of the helicopter. The roar of the blades drowned out everything except the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. For once, I wasn't bracing for their judgment. They were bracing for mine. When we landed, the sight that greeted them was not the shabby apartment they'd imagined, not the cramped loft with loud neighbors Dad had asked about the day before. It was a sprawling 20-acre ranch, a modern farmhouse rising proudly at its center, flanked by solar panels that glittered under the Virginia sun, and an orchard I'd planted the year after Verdant sold. The chopper touched down on the private helipad behind a grove of oak trees. Dust swirled around us as Reed powered down, and when the blades finally slowed, I opened the door and stepped out. "Welcome to my home," I said simply. Their reactions were exactly what I expected. Rachel's mouth dropped open, eyes darting from the farmhouse to the manicured gardens to the sleek Tesla parked in the driveway. She stumbled a little as she stepped out of the helicopter, her heels sinking into the grass. Eli froze mid-step, his polished composure faltering as he took in the sight of the property. His lips parted, but no words came out. Mom's eyes filled with tears, her hand clutching Dad's arm as he blinked rapidly, trying to process. This is yours?" Rachel whispered finally, her voice trembling. I nodded. Every inch of it. Inside the farmhouse, I guided them into the great room, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the orchard beyond. A long oak table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. On the table, waiting neatly, were folders. "Sit," I said, gesturing. They did, reluctantly, confusion etched on their faces. Rachel was the first to break the silence. "Okay, Ava. What is all this? Since when do you have a company?" Her voice cracked on the last word, as if it physically hurt her to say it. I took my seat at the head of the table, folding my hands calmly. "Since 8 years ago, I founded a startup, Verdant. We created a carbon tracking app for homeowners. It got acquired for $35 million 6 months ago. I stayed on as chief vision officer. I still own a large chunk of equity." The silence was deafening. Mom gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad blinked, his gaze suddenly sharper. "$35 million?" he murmured, as if testing the words on his tongue. Eli's face flushed red. "That's impossible," he snapped. "If you had that kind of money, why wouldn't you say anything? Why hide it?" Rachel shook her head, her voice rising. "You let us think you were broke. You let us pity you." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Because you never asked. You assumed. You decided who I was years ago, and you never looked back. I slid one of the folders across the table. Inside were bank statements, trust documents, and donation records. Mom, Dad, I said, looking directly at them. Do you remember the insurance refunds you thought were errors? The anonymous deposits that covered your medical bills? That was me. I've been paying for your care for the last 2 years. Mom's hand trembled as she picked up the papers, scanning the lines with tear-filled eyes. You did this? She whispered. Dad looked at me, clearer than I'd seen him in months. You took care of us, he said slowly. When we thought. His voice trailed off, but his eyes said the rest. Eli shifted uncomfortably, his composure crumbling. You should have told us. You could have what? I cut in. Mocked me some more? Stolen another idea? Patted me on the head like I was the family charity case? His jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. I turned my gaze to Rachel. And you, I said softly. Do you know how many investors backed out after hearing rumors that I was unstable? Do you know how many family friends cut me off because of the whispers you spread at your wine tastings? Rachel's face paled. Those were just jokes. I didn't think. You didn't think, I interrupted. You didn't care. You painted me as the screw-up because it made your life shinier by comparison. Her lip trembled, but her eyes hardened. So what? You're throwing this in our faces now? Showing off just to humiliate us? I sat back, my voice calm. No. I'm showing you the truth. You built your identities on dismissing me. I built mine in silence. This isn't revenge. This is reality. Eli finally snapped, his voice sharp. That promotion I got. What you keep saying I stole. It wasn't just your idea. I improved it. I made it viable. I met his eyes evenly. No, Eli. You stole it. And now, your firm is drowning in debt. Living beyond your means caught up with you. I have contacts. I know. His face drained of color. Rachel gasped, turning toward him. Is that true? She demanded. Eli's silence was answer enough. I looked at all of them, my voice steady but firm. You called me poor. You laughed at me. You wrote me out of this family. And while you did, I was building something bigger than you could imagine. You underestimated me because it made you feel safe. But that safety is gone now. The story you've told about me ends here. Mom sobbed quietly, clutching Dad's hand. He looked at me with pride and sorrow all at once. Rachel sat rigid, her mascara smudging as her composure cracked. Eli stared at the floor, red-faced, fists clenched, his empire of arrogance collapsing around him. And me? I finally felt free. The table was still covered in untouched food when the shouting began. Eli's voice cracked like glass, loud and defensive, insisting he was still the one holding the family together. Rachel's tone rose higher, shrill and wounded, accusing me of betrayal, of selfishness, of humiliating them. Mom tried to calm things, her voice trembling with tears. Dad's eyes darted between us, at times sharp, at times lost again in the fog of memory. And me? I sat quietly, watching them unravel. I had waited my whole life for this moment, for them to finally see me. And here it was. But the truth was bitter. They didn't see me at all. They only saw what my success meant for their own reflection. They weren't ashamed of how they had treated me. They were ashamed they had been wrong. That was the final clarity I needed. I stood, the scrape of my chair cutting through their overlapping voices. For the first time in years, they fell silent, eyes turning toward me. I didn't come here for this, I said softly. I didn't come to fight. I didn't come to prove anything. I came for Mom and Dad. I gestured toward the folder still lying open in front of them. The Westbrook Foundation has a trust in their name. Their care is fully covered. Every expense, every treatment, every luxury facility you circled on those slides, it's already secured. They will never want for anything. Not because of you, not because of me, but because it's done. Mom's tears flowed freely. Ava, you've been doing this for us all this time? I nodded, quietly, because I wanted you safe. That's all that mattered. Dad's eyes, clear for a rare moment, locked on mine. My Ava, he whispered. You did good. I swallowed hard, fighting back my own tears. That's all I ever wanted to hear. Eli pushed back from the table, his face red, his pride in pieces. So what? You think this makes you better than us? You think money fixes everything? You're still the outsider, Ava. You'll always be the outsider. Rachel's voice cracked, her mascara streaked. You let us believe you were nothing. You hid this from us. You made us look like fools. I shook my head slowly. No, you did that all on your own. I turned to Brittany, my assistant, who had been waiting quietly at the edge of the room. Get the helicopter ready. We're heading back. She nodded, already dialing Reed. Eli's fists clenched. You can't just walk out like this. We're a family. I looked at him, steady, calm. Family isn't supposed to break you, Eli. Family isn't supposed to silence you or steal from you. If that's what family means to you, then no, I'm not part of it anymore. Rachel reached for me, desperate, trembling. You'll regret this, Ava. You'll regret cutting us out. I met her gaze evenly. I regret wasting so many years trying to earn your love. That ends today. The sound of rotor blades filled the air again, this time no longer a secret but a declaration. Papers fluttered off the table. The chandelier rattled overhead. I slung my old backpack over my shoulder and walked toward the door. I didn't look back as I stepped outside, the downwash whipping through my hair, the wind carrying away the last remnants of their voices. Reed extended his hand to help me into the chopper. Brittany climbed in beside me. As the helicopter lifted off, I glanced one last time at the house growing smaller below us. On the porch, Eli stood rigid, fists still tight. Rachel clutched her bag like a lifeline. Mom sobbed quietly against Dad's shoulder. Dad looked up, his lips forming my name, and then they were gone. Back in Austin, I sat in my loft, staring out at the ocean from my floor-to-ceiling window. The weight that had sat on my chest for years was gone. I blocked their numbers, transferred management of my parents' trust fully to my legal team, and then I let go. Eli's firm collapsed within months, the debt I had quietly known about dragging him under. Rachel's pristine social circle began to crumble once the truth about her rumors surfaced, her perfect image cracking under the weight of reality. I didn't watch. I didn't care. That wasn't my story anymore. For the first time in my life, I understood something no one had ever taught me. Self-respect is worth more than family approval. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to finally stand tall. I thought I had built Verdant to change the world. But the truth was, it changed me. It gave me the courage to stop begging for a place at a table that had been built to keep me small. Now, I build my own tables. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to this story to remember, it's this. Don't wait for them to see you. Don't waste your life waiting for their permission. You are enough. You always were. So that's my story. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cut down by the very people who were supposed to lift you up, know this, you are not alone. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Stories that remind us we are stronger than the voices that try to define us. And before you go, answer this in the comments. If you had the chance to walk away from a family that never respected you, would you do it? Or would you keep trying to win them over? Type A if you'd walk away. Type B if you'd stay and keep fighting. I'll be reading every response. And trust me, what you choose says more about you than you think.